Chapter 5. Don't mind being the object of my venting. Sheng Shaoyou hadn't expected to meet Hua Yong again so soon. Sheng Fan's condition had been far from stable. Earlier that afternoon, Chen Pingming had relayed the doctor's assessment to Sheng Shaoyou. Sheng Fang didn't have much time left. Sheng Shaoyou's expression remained calm, as though he had just heard the most ordinary progress report. He responded flatly, "Got it." Yet only a few hours later, he left the company early. Recently, Sheng Shaoyou had been working overtime almost every day, so leaving before the end of the workday was highly unusual. Once inside the car, his longtime personal driver cautiously asked for the destination. Closing his eyes in exhaustion, Sheng Shaoyou said Hsia Hospital wasn't far from Shengfang Biotech. 20 minutes later, Sheng Shaoyou walked through the main entrance of Hsia alone. He ran into Hua Yong in the elevator. Hua Yong's surprise was evident. His eyes widened momentarily, but Sheng Shaoyou pretended not to see him. Once inside the elevator, he stood in place and silently pressed the button for the top floor, keeping his gaze straight ahead. Hua Yong wasn't alone. Beside him was a doctor in a white coat speaking to him. Sheng Shaoyou hadn't intended to eavesdrop, but elevators were confined spaces, and he caught every word of their conversation clearly. The doctor was discussing the cost of surgery. "The 200,000 yuan you just paid is far from enough. At least an additional 600,000 yuan needs to be prepaid, or else bed 291. The doctor paused, as if realizing that referring to a patient by their bed number in front of a family member seemed too inhumane. "So," he corrected himself, "or else your sister's surgery will have to be postponed." The doctor's words made Hua Yong's pale face flush red in an instant, perhaps out of shame at having his financial struggles exposed to Sheng Shaoyou once again, or perhaps for another reason. After a long silence, Hua Yong spoke hesitantly, trying to negotiate with the doctor. Is it possible to perform the surgery first and pay later?" He knew himself how unreasonable such a request was at a private hospital, but he had no other options. Desperation laced his voice as he repeatedly promised the doctor, "Elsewhere, I'll do everything I can to gather the money as soon as possible." The doctor's expression showed his discomfort, but his response was firm. "I'm sorry, sir. I truly sympathize with your situation, but this goes against the hospital's policies. There's nothing I can do." "My apologies." Out of the corner of his eye, Sheng Shaoyou saw Hua Yong bow his head, looking as though he might cry again. "Ha! Do everything he can?" If he'd truly done everything, how could he not scrape together such a meager sum? What a waste of that face. Isn't he so good at playing lovey-dovey with Sheng Wenlang? Go then, grab any watch off Sheng Wen Xian's wrist, and it'd be worth more than that amount. Hua Yong followed the doctor out of the elevator on the 5th floor, his thin, frail figure looking unbearably pitiful. Sheng Shaoyou suddenly recalled that the first time he met Hua Yong was also on the 5th floor, by the children's ward. Back then, Hua Yong had been crying because he couldn't come up with the money for surgery either. His thoughts were interrupted by the ding of the elevator arriving at its destination. The top floor. In Sheng Fan's hospital room, only a young beta caretaker was present. Sheng Xiaoqing and the others' performative visits, as lowly as their origins, stopped as soon as the audience disappeared. Without the attention, they couldn't be bothered to keep up the charade. On the hospital bed lay Sheng Fang, his face etched with illness. He wore an oxygen mask, weak and unconscious. Over the past year, he'd rarely been lucid, almost never, in fact. The caretaker bustled around attentively, serving tea, fetching water, and even preparing a meticulously arranged fruit platter for Sheng Shaoyou. The presentation was so polished, it could easily rival anything sold outside Dian, but Sheng Shaoyou had always been highly sensitive to attempts at ingratiation. The flip side of ingratiation was extraction. He detested all the faces, in every shape and form, that sought to gain something from him. Expressionlessly, he ordered the caretaker to leave. Then, sitting in the chair by Sheng Fang's bedside, Sheng Shaoyou silently gazed at the white hairs at Sheng Fan's temples and the wrinkles around his eyes that could no longer be concealed. For the first time, he felt the deep reality of aging and death. Vitality was steadily ebbing away from this frail body, in ways too subtle and gradual for the naked eye to catch. Sheng Fang had grown old and fallen ill. Perhaps, in the not-so-distant future, he would succumb to his illness and pass away. Sheng Shaoyou recalled the night before Sheng Fang's tumor surgery. That night, Sheng Fang had spoken with all of his children for a while, giving them many instructions and parting words. But in the end, he only kept Sheng Shaoyou behind to stay with him in the hospital room. Sheng Fang's spirits had been unusually high, his voice firm and steady. On the surface, he didn't appear to be someone at death's door. Only his gaze betrayed an uncharacteristic hint of hesitation and tenderness. He had silently observed the young, alpha heir before him. Tall, handsome, possessing S-level pheromones, diligent, ambitious, hardworking, and endowed with extraordinary talent for discerning commercial trends. This was his son, Sheng Fang's own bloodline left in the world, his masterpiece crafted under the strictest principles of discipline, a creation he could take the utmost pride in. Looking at Sheng Shaoyou's expression, which was so cold it bordered on indifference, Sheng Fang asked a question. "Shaoyou, do you hate me?" he asked directly, a question that had lingered in his heart for many years. Now, with death looming precariously close, the words flowed from his throat as calmly as the tongue Sheng Fang had once asked his wife. "Will you marry me?" And promised her, "I will treat you well for the rest of my life." He had known his wife loved him and would undoubtedly say yes, so he had been at ease. Just as now, Sheng Fang knew Sheng Shaoyou undoubtedly hated him, so he felt no nervousness. Sheng Shaoyou lowered his eyes and said nothing. Sheng Fang waited patiently for a long time but received no answer. Sheng Shaoyou mercifully chose not to respond. But silence itself was an answer. Sheng Fang didn't press him further, because whether the answer was yes or no longer held any practical significance. He tucked away the rare moment of sensitivity and vulnerability, shifting instead to a more pragmatic topic of inheritance. He asked, "What if your dad, leave the entire company to you? Would that be all right?" Sheng Shaoyou's expression remained unchanged, his tone flat as he countered, "And what about Sheng Xiaoqing and the others? If the existence of the illegitimate children was the greatest wedge between father and son, then Sheng Xiaoqing, only 2 years younger than Sheng Shaoyou, was the largest wedge among them all." Sheng Shaoyou's mother had passed away early, and the other children Sheng Fang fathered could, at most, be considered illegitimate. But Sheng Xiaoqing was different. His very existence was proof of Sheng Fang's infidelity to his original wife. "You don't need to worry about that. I've set up cash trusts for them." Sheng Fang fully reverted to the decisive leader he'd always been, objectively remarking, "Xiaoqing and the others only know how to eat, drink, and play. They have no clue about running a company." The way he looked at Sheng Shaoyou was like an artist admiring his finest creation. "Xiaoyu, compared to your siblings, I've certainly been stricter with you. But in my heart, there's only ever been one true heir." Strictly raising the child of his legitimate wife while spoiling and ruining the children of mistresses. Sheng Fang believed himself to be farsighted and strategic. Yet he never considered that a worthless person would not stop coveting a throne encrusted with jewels simply because they were worthless. After coming out of the ward, Sheng Shaoyou entered the elevator. When the elevator reached the 5th floor, it stopped again. The elevator door slowly opened to reveal Hua Yong standing outside, looking lost and distraught. He lifted his head and saw Sheng Shaoyou inside. A flicker of hesitation appeared on his pale face, as though debating whether or not to step in. The elevator doors began to close, only to be stopped by a hand reaching out. The elevator emitted a sharp beep as Sheng Shaoyou blocked the doors. His brow furrowed as he impatiently urged, "Are you getting in or not?" Hua Yong snapped out of his stupor, hesitantly stepping into the elevator. Even after entering, he didn't make any effort to speak to Sheng Shaoyou. Instead, he stood silently at the front, leaning weakly against the elevator wall with his head lowered. This indifference toward his savior displeased Sheng Shaoyou greatly. His heated gaze bored into the Omega's back for a long moment before he coldly broke the silence. What a coincidence! Hua Yong, who was trying to lower his presence and act invisible, didn't expect Sheng Shaoyou to initiate a conversation. Startled, he turned his head to find Sheng Shaoyou staring at him with a frosty expression. Forcing a smile, Hua Yong replied, "Yes, Emma Sheng, what a coincidence." Hua Yong lowered his gaze to his toes, looking distracted. But out of courtesy, he forced himself to make small talk, asking, "I heard Mr. Sheng's father is also hospitalized here at HCI. Are you here to visit him?" The hospitalization of Shengfang Biotech's founder had been reported in financial news. Hua Yong wasn't particularly skilled at making conversation. Even asking if Sheng Shaoyou had received the cufflink would have been better than directly mentioning Sheng Fan's condition. Sheng Shaoyou's expression visibly darkened, his icy gaze practically saying, "And what does that have to do with you?" The young Omega glanced up at him quickly, his expression filled with regret, as though he realized too late that he'd accidentally touched Sheng Shaoyou's raw nerve. Pressing his lips together, Hua Yong lowered his gaze again, an unmistakable look of guilt crossing his pale face. He seemed to have guessed that Sheng Shaoyou's father's health was in dire straits and was now kicking himself for bringing it up. Sheng Shaoyou's thoughts turned cold. This Omega, who couldn't seem to read the room, probably knew deep down that every time they met, he somehow managed to step on one of Sheng Shaoyou's landmines. Elle just asked casually, "I didn't mean anything by it. I'm sorry if I upset you. Upset me?" Sheng Shaoyou crossed his arms, his gaze mocking as he looked down at him. "What do I have to be upset about? I'm not the one who can't afford to pay medical bills." The words were barely out of his mouth when Sheng Shaoyou froze, startled by his own harshness. He'd always been adept at masking his emotions, never one to let cutting remarks show so plainly. Yet somehow, Hua Yong always seemed to make him break his own rules. The fragile Omega, completely unguarded, was suddenly struck where it hurt the most. He looked up at Sheng Shaoyou in disbelief. "What? Did I say something wrong? Oh damn. Is he about to cry again?" Sheng Shaoyou realized that this delicate Omega, with an innocent and pitiful look and a body carrying the fragrance of white orchid, easily caused him to lose control of his emotions. It made him abandon his rational composure and resort to childish provocations, just to exchange a few more words with him. "You're right," Hua Yong said, not crying but looking visibly disappointed. Elle just didn't expect such uncouth words to come out of Mr. Sheng's mouth. Sheng Shaoyou felt a sharp pang in his chest, as if someone had slapped him in public. He was so angry that his teeth ached with frustration, yet he couldn't figure out who exactly he was angry at. Struggling to maintain his cold demeanor, he retorted with a stoic face, "Even so, I'd rather be uncouth than a penniless, pathetic Omega with no self-respect like you." Penniless and pathetic, that was true. But no self-respect? Who gave him the right to say that? Hua Yong's expression shifted, as if he were a mermaid whose tail had just been stepped on. His beautiful face twisted with a mix of anger and helpless sorrow. "You." It was only then that Sheng Shaoyou noticed how tall Hua Yong actually was, even no shorter than Sheng Shaoyou, who was a top-tier alpha. But so what if he was tall? He was still a fragile Omega, destined to depend on an alpha to survive. With his hands stuffed into his pockets but his fists clenched tightly, Sheng Shaoyou said coldly, "The employee benefits at HS Group must be awful. As Shen Wenlang's personal secretary, you work in the office by day, flirt with your boss in his office in the evening, and then head to nightclubs to sell drinks late at night. You work so diligently yet still can't scrape together a mere 600,000 yuan. He sneered disdainfully, raising an eyebrow as he continued mercilessly, "Shen Wenlang really is stingy with you." Hua Yong froze, his pupils trembling. It took all his strength to steady himself, though his voice still wavered slightly. "Mr. Sheng, I don't know what's upset you today. But if hurting me with your words can bring you the comfort and sense of superiority you need, then I don't mind being the object of your venting." With aiding, the elevator doors opened. Hua Yong walked out without looking back. "Just consider it repayment for the time you saved me at Tiandihui." Sheng Shaoyou watched him stride out of the elevator angrily, and, inexplicably, a laugh slipped from his lips. "Don't mind being the object of my venting?" Did this Omega, with his rich white orchid scent and fragile demeanor, even understand the weight of what he just said? However, contrary to the submissiveness Sheng Shaoyou had expected, he turned out to be feistier than imagined, quite fierce, actually.